In spirit of Halloween, here is Melia's magical Moggy. It was Halloween. Crisp autumn leaves carpeted the pavements and gardens around 17 Kibble Green. Candles flickered inside warm homes, waiting patiently for witches, wands and magic. Children eagerly anticipated going trick-or-treating, guzzling sweets decorated as eyeballs and lime-flavoured slime, as well as gooey marshmallow ghouls. Halloween buckets for the great Sweetie Hall lay on tables and pumpkins carved in scary grins, waiting for that magical time. As Melia lay in bed after a full week of school, her thoughts turned to her magical Moggy. Mum had bathed her, read her a bedtime story and kissed her goodnight on her nose. She left the door ajar, as she always did, under the butter-warm glow of the bathroom, lit up by a rectangle of light on her carpet. Outside her bedroom window, the cherry blossom tree tapped on the glass as the wind pushed it backwards and forwards. Melia had not heard from her Moggy in what felt like 100 years. She'd kept an eye out on the usual places that cats like to go, under bushes, high garden fences, and places that she thought a magical cat might turn up, under the kitchen sink, for example, or even in the toilet bowl. She had gazed at the sky, half expecting him to swoop up by, but there was nothing. She'd stared out the window at school as if waiting for him to come floating on a jasmine breeze, but all she saw were fat pigeons on the flat, rain-drenched playground, and she wondered if she would ever see him again. She dreamt of him too. Tea parties encased in a snail shell, dreams of jasmine in summer, a wet Moggy and flying with beetle-black wings through a dark winter's night. But for all her longing, her magical Moggy didn't materialise. And now it was October. And for all her imaginings, her magical Moggy did exactly what she hoped he would do. As she lay on her bed, her window an open invitation, he swooped in and landed neatly on the carpet. "For all the confounded, ridiculous, preposterous, presumptuous things," he began angrily. But Melia was so pleased to see him, she bounded off her bed and wrapped her arms around him. Get off, he shouted, not to be put off. Amelia let him go, but continued to beam at him, as if she couldn't quite believe he was back. How dare you, how very dare you? Do you know what day it is? Well, do you? Yes, it's October. It's Halloween, he shouted, interrupting her. And I've heard nothing but your continual whinging about where I am, like a dog with a bone, just gnawing and gnawing away at my head. What's the matter with you? I'm a cat with a witch to think about. Haven't I expressly told you that before? Well, yes, she began, but I didn't call you. How could I call you? Suddenly her eyes grew wild with realisation. You can hear my thoughts. Well, of course I can hear your thoughts at the volume you've been thinking at me. I would have thought you realised that at least. I am magical, you know. Not your everyday cat. Oh, wow, she grinned, very pleased with herself for summoning him. As I was saying, it's Halloween, the most important day of the year, and I have things to do, people to see. I'm a very busy and important creature. I cannot have you summoning me, and I cannot be distracted. Not tonight of all nights. So, he took a deep breath, you just have to come with me. In an instant, he waved his little black paw, and Melia felt the world growing, or rather, she was shrinking. Excitedly, she remembered the last time he had transformed her into a ladybird, and the time before that she was a dung beetle. She wrinkled her nose at the memory of her little pincers stinking of poop after obsessively rolling poop into large boulders. Well, come along, I haven't got all day. You've got wings, use them. And with that, he hopped onto the windowsill, opened his own black paws, which suddenly transformed into large black bat wings, and flew out. Melia watched as he took to the sky and seemed to be folded into the dark. He was leaving her behind, and so she jumped into the air and frantically flapped her wings as buzzing filled her ears. Glancing at her reflection in the window before flying into the sky, she saw what she had changed into. A mosquito? Why not a little bird or a sparrow or something like that? She said as she launched herself into the air. The cat flashed his wicked sharp teeth at her. Really? You think a bird would be a wise choice? And they say humans are intelligent creatures. Sighing to himself, he slowed down and flew beside her. Amelia imagined he was rolling his eyes at her. Where are we going? You do not want to be seen. Seeing as you insist on coming along, I have made you as inconspicuous as I can. What does that mean? It means don't get in their way and don't get noticed. Melia managed to keep up with the Moggy through the knobbly trees of the wily wood and then on to Hand Tree Forest. The large full moon hung above them, and as they flew closer and closer, Melia felt her little heart flutter in excitement. Gazing down, she saw what looked like enormous hands growing out of the ground like trees. Thick, knobbly fingers grew fleshy and fat. Orange and red and crusted brown leaves sprouted from their tips. And then Amelia noticed that beneath them were dozens and dozens of witches. The air became filled with a crackling sound of cackling as clumps of what first looked like little dark shapes moved and melted into black capes of the evil ones. Pointed hats hovered around what looked like a campfire, and beneath one tree, smoke billowed from a cauldron. As you can see, a dangerous position for any mortal, never mind a child, so keep your wits about you, said the Moggy as he dipped his bat-like wings and flew down towards them. That's my witch close to the cauldron. I have duties to perform, so I must go. You can watch, but I warn you, stay out of sight. Witches on Halloween are at the height of their power, and of course, they are never hungrier for the bones of a child than this night. And with that, he drifted in silence towards the clattering lot of leaving Amelia in her mosquito form hovering beside a nearby tree. The magical Moggy's witch looked like what Melia thought all witches looked like. She was green with an enormous wart on the end of her nose. She wore a black cape, a long black skirt with a tatty hemline, and stripy red and black tights, black ankle boots, and on her head she wore a large triangular black hat. They were all dancing around the cauldron, making a really loud racket. Melia watched as sparks of pink, green and blue whizzed out of the bubbling cauldron. Mesmerised and completely safe in her disguise, she flew closer to get a better look. The witches were dancing around on the grass. Some were drinking what looked like hot beverage. Some were practicing spells with their magic wands. Melia even saw one sitting on a tree trunk reading a book. But the cauldron was beginning to bubble up and move. Melia watched as it shook, slowly at first, but it soon picked up pace. It rocked and it rumbled, it fizzed and it foamed, bubbled and bumbled before bursting with a riot of colour and sparks. Melia watched as two skinny legs, bent at the knees, sprouted at the base of the cauldron and hopped up and down in excitement. Suddenly it coughed and then spat out a large orange pumpkin. The surrounding witches hooted with glee. Hats were thrown into the air in celebration, and to Melia's surprise, she saw that the witch's hair didn't float downwards like everybody else's, but flew upwards towards the sky. Happy Halloween! They cackled one after the other. It was then that Melia noticed a black cat come out from behind the black bushes and perch on the witch's black broom. The magical Moggy drew closer, sat patiently, and waited for his witch to hop on. It was then that Amelia heard the witches begin to sing. Off into the night where the moon is riding high, off to meet our destiny and the child who hears our cry. Melia was very glad that she was a mosquito. She felt all shivery and a bit scared of the witches looking for a child. It was a well-known fact that witches hated children. In fact, in some books that she'd read, witches could sniff children out and they smelt revolting. But then she was a mosquito, so surely she was safe. Through the night, as black as fright, as black as sin, as black as white, through the air on Hallows Eve, through the clouds astride our steeds. Melia landed on a nearby branch above the fire to listen to the witches chanting, and as she watched, other cats materialised from the bushes in puffs of pink magical dust, a cat for every witch, and in their paws they held broomsticks, or perched on the end of one, all waiting for their witches. The fumes from the fires smelt like sweet sugar, and Melia felt herself getting very dizzy. She decided to fly lower and landed on a pumpkin that had flown out of the cauldron. As she did so, she saw a witch close by her singing. Melia watched as the witch's ugly features seemed to grow large and swirly as a tiredness began to take hold. The pumpkin seemed enormous, and the bright orange firelight. A wand leaned under the pumpkin, and it was then that she had a brilliant idea. Why couldn't she do a little magic? How hard could it be? Pink and blue sugary flames befuddled her tiny brain as her little mosquito feet landed on the white tip of the wand. But instead of muttering any magical words that she thought she knew, her mind was filled with an enormous orange pumpkin. And before she knew it, Sparks flew out the wand, whizzing and popping in all directions. Pink, blue and gold fizzed and crackled as silver balls sprung out from the tip. Squeaking in shock, she fell off the wand and into the cold grass below. Flapping her tiny wings, she flew frantically into a small bush and hid. The silver balls began to grow and grow and grow. And as they did so, the silver balls slowly turned orange. Melia recognised them as pumpkins. Pumpkin after pumpkin began rolling along the floor like gigantic marbles. They were rolling in circles, banging into each other and bumping into the witch's feet, while the wand spat out more and more silver balls that were rapidly growing into more and more huge orange pumpkins. "Oh," she whispered to herself as she watched the area become overrun with pumpkins. The witches looked around confused. Where had they all come from? Some witches didn't care. They hopped onto their brooms and took off into the night sky, and some waited and watched. "Helga!" one witch shouted with yellow eyes and long black hair that floated upward. "That's your wand! It's gone crazy! Why haven't you got it under control?" "There's nothing wrong with my wand," Helga shouted back angrily. She was just about to hop onto a broomstick where her black cat was perched obediently at the tip before anyone could begin to blame her when her Moggy hopped off. He carefully strode towards a wand, and that was still shooting silver balls. His sleek black fur shimmered in the firelight. Sidestepping the rolling pumpkins, the black cat strolled towards the wand and very closely towards Melia, who was still hidden. She held her breath. "Helga! Helga! What?" she shouted angrily. "You're a witch," her cat said calmly. "Tell me, what do you smell?" Suddenly, the forest fell quiet. The silver balls stopped growing, the pumpkins stopped rolling, and the wand stopped sparking. All fell silent as the white moon watched from high in the black sky. Another witch, Ada, stepped forwards, while Helga and her black cat, her beady yellow eyes, looked around Hanover Forest. "I smell a child." At her words, it was as if electricity was in the air. Those tiny hairs on Amelia's little body stood on end. The witches had taken to the skies, halted. They swooped in loops down on their broomsticks, trailing golden magical sparks from behind, yelping and howling in excitement as they landed back down in Hanover Forest. They immediately sensed that Ada and Helga were right. Somewhere there was a child. Amelia's little heart fluttered round her chest nervously, shrinking as small as she could behind the bush. She held her breath. She'd heard of witches. They ate children. They turned them into soup and ate them for supper. What was she going to do now? She daren't fly away. She daren't crawl away. And she daren't even think about her magical Moggy that wasn't really hers. Her magical Moggy, of course. She could call him with her thoughts. And so, in her mind, she saw the witch with the nose in the ground, sniffing her out. She screamed desperately and as loudly as she could in her head as for his help. And as soon as she did, something black and lumpy fell from the sky. What? Do you have to do that? I was at this very moment being navigated from my witch on our broom, for heaven's sake, and you go screaming in my head like that. It's dangerous. I nearly fell off. The witches all turned to see the Moggy. He muttered quietly to himself before a look of puzzlement moved over his face as he saw the pumpkins. Oh. Then he noticed the sky as witch after witch was landing around the campfire. They hopped off and began sniffing and sniffing as if they were bloodhounds. Some of them were sniffing the air, others were on all fours, sniffing on the ground like dogs. Carefully, without drawing attention to himself, Melia's magical Moggy tiptoed over to where he'd found her and found the witches Ada and Helga sniffing. Suddenly, a large yellow round eye looked on Amelia. As enormous as the sun, with vertical irises, its gaze was fixed on the little mosquito. Gotcha. The witch Ada grinned, revealing her razor-sharp teeth, and before Amelia knew it, magical words were said and the world rushed up to meet her. She was normal size again and wearing her white nightie that she was before being transformed into mosquito. A child! Helga shouted excitedly as she hopped on from foot to foot, dancing on the spot. I knew it! I knew it! Her magical Moggy looked at her and yawned. I think she'd never seen a child before, he muttered to himself as he walked lazily away. Well, 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 little girlie, what a pleasant surprise, she said in a croaky voice. Her green face leaned in close. Melia shuddered in fear. What on earth shall we do with you? The other witches suddenly looked very hungry as they gathering around. Melia's Moggy froze. This was a tricky situation. Children were not allowed here. Their presence literally sent witches mad, as they would all fight over who could eat her first. He was breaking every rule by bringing her to this ceremony. No matter how much he screamed in his head, there was nothing he could do. The witch Helga bent down and retrieved her wand and waved it while muttering a spell. Her wicked yellow eyes stared at Melia, looking much like a cat who was about to swallow a bird whole. With a wave of her retrieved wand, Melia blinked, and she was bound tight to a stick, turning around the fire like a roast pig. The witches nearby cackled in excitement and began to chant, a child, a filthy child, caught out here in the wicked wild, a child so meek and mild, what fun we'll have as we defile. How shall we cook her, boil or roast, cut her in pieces and spread her on toast? How shall we cook her, boil or roast, whatever we choose, she'll end up a ghost. Now Melia did not like the sound of that, not one little bit. All the witches began chanting excitedly as they danced around the fire, as Melia steadily getting hotter and hotter. Her mind screamed for her magical Moggy to save her, but she couldn't see him anywhere. What was she going to do? Those witches were really going to cook and eat her. A tear rolled down her cheek as the witches nearby turning the handle as she slowly round and round as she roasted. All her life flashed before her eyes. Was her life really going to end like this? Here, in the deepest part of Hanover Forest, here at the back of the wily woods, surely her magical Moggy would get her out of this. And that was when it happened. The clouds covered the moon and the heavens opened. A thunderstorm. Lightning seared across the darkening sky. Thunder clapped and rumbled angrily as the clouds parted. More rain than Melia had ever seen in her life. It was like a flood from the sky. It was like a vertical river. It was like a monsoon. The witches screamed. They mounted their brooms and flew off into the skies and left her. They actually left her. The fire hissed as black smoke poured and snaked up into the sky, blinding the sopping wet Melia. And as the smoke cleared, the rain eased up, and it was then that she saw him, her magical Moggy, striding towards her, also soaking wet and looking very cross indeed. You were supposed to be here secretly, he said angrily while shaking the water off his sopping wet paws. Not taking a witch's wand and casting spells and creating some kind of pumpkin pandemonium. No wonder they smelt you out, you ridiculous child. What if I wasn't here to save you? Melia smiled as he flicked the last bit of water from his paw, and he used a claw to slice off her bonds. She didn't bother mentioning to him that if he wasn't there, she would never have been in this situation in the first place. She was just relieved that she was no longer going to be roasted and put on toast for witches on All Hallows Eve. Well, that's a Halloween I'll never forget, she chuckled to herself as he began to squeeze out her nightie that she was wearing before she changed to a mosquito. She was hoping that the Moggy might dry her out with some magic, but he was so cross she thought she'd better not ask. He stalked off into the forest while Melia trotted obediently behind him. Where's your witch anyway? She said after a few moments' silence. She doesn't like the rain. Neither do cats. Surprise, surprise. I had to get wet, otherwise someone would have suspected that I was involved somehow, and then I'd be in the worst trouble imaginable. But it's a well-known fact that too much rain will melt a witch into a muddy puzzle. That's something witches usually try to avoid. Melia and her Moggy walked on in silence. She knew that he would get her home safely, and for all his foul-temperedness, she loved him, and she knew that he loved having her around. He was just too much of a grump to admit it. The Moggy's lips twitched in agreement as he heard her thoughts, and as if by magic the clouds cleared, and the night went back to being as clear and crisp and new as it was before the magical rainstorm. And the magical Moggy sprouted his bat wings, grasped Melia's hand, and flew them back into Melia's open bedroom window. As they approached the house, in an instant her clothes dried out, so she was able to tumble into bed without Mum being any the wiser. Melia smiled to herself as the magical Moggy pulled her blanket up to her nose. She looked at him with his sparkly green eyes. She thought of her adventures and how lucky she was to have a magical Moggy, and just how much she loved him. Hearing her thoughts, her magical Moggy smiled. if cats can do such a thing, and licked her nose quickly with his rough tongue. Melia giggled. She could hear her mum in the room next door softly snoring, and Melia suddenly wished that she'd taken a pumpkin for her and to make some pumpkin soup with her and her nan-nan. After all, there was suddenly an abundance of pumpkins. She'd hate for them to go to waste. The end. Thanks for listening. That was Melia's Magical Moggy and the Pumpkin Instant. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, as well as Facebook.